Well, we last time I left off, we finished with not chapter one, but part one of the book, and now we're starting part two. Um, Twilight, yeah, the part two is called Twilight and Beyond, and at the beginning of every part of this book, there is a little poem, and before I start with the chapter, I'm going to read that. Um, Overall, it's a pretty safe chapter. There's no trigger warnings I can think of, and that's pretty good. I guess. Yeah, that is really good. Um, but it's pretty decent. Not too long, not too short of a chapter. Um, with that being said, I'll read the poem and then I'll get to reading the chapter itself. Believe me when I say there are two powers that command the soul. One is God, the other is the tide. Chapter 10, The Waters. The Sea of Isabella was considerably colder than Candy had expected. It was gaspingly cold, iced to the marrow cold, but it was too late for her to change her mind now. With the ball knocked out of the cup by Mischief's bullet, the Sea of Isabella was retreating from the jetty at the same extraordinary speed at which it had first appeared, and it was carrying Candy and the John brothers along with it. The waters seemed to have a life of their own. Several times the sheer force of their energies threatened to pull her under, but Mischief had the trick of it. "Don't try to swim," he yelled to her over the roar of the retreating seas. "Just trust to Mama Isabella to take us where she wants us to go." Candy had little choice, she quickly realized. The sea was an irresistible power, so why not just lie back and enjoy the ride? She did so, and it worked like a charm. The moment Candy stopped flailing and trusted the sea not to harm her, the Isabella buoyed her up, the waves lifting her so high that on occasion she caught sight of the jetty and the lighthouse. They were already very far off, left behind in another world. She scanned the waters, looking for Shape, but she couldn't see him. "You're looking for Mr. Shape?" said John Slop. He didn't need to yell any longer. Now they were a good distance from the shore. The waves were no longer so noisy. "Yes, I was," Candy said, spitting out water every 5 or 6 words. "But I don't see him." "He has a glyph," Mischief said by way of explanation. "A glyph? What's a glyph?" "It's a craft, a flying machine. Well, actually, it's words that turn into a flying machine." "She doesn't understand what you're saying, Mischief," John Sallow said. Sallow was right. Candy was completely confused by what Mischief was telling her. Words that turn into vehicles? Despite the look of incomprehension on her face, Mischief pressed on with his explanation. "The better you are at magic, the more quickly you can conjure a glyph. For the really expert magician, someone who knows his summonings, it can be almost instantaneous. 2 or 3 and you've got a flying machine. But it will take Shape several minutes to conjure it. He's not a bright fellow, and if you get a conjuration wrong, it can be very messy." "Messy? Why?" "Because glyphs get you up in the air," Mischief said, pointing skyward. "But if they fail for some reason, you fall," said Candy. "You fall," Mischief said. "One of my sisters died in a decaying glyph." "Oh, I'm sorry," Candy said. "She was being abducted at the time," he said rather matter-of-factly. "That's terrible." "We later found out she'd arranged it all." "I don't understand. Arranged to be abducted?" "Yes. She was in love with this fellow, you see, who did not love her. So she arranged to be abducted so that he would come after her and save her." "And did he?" "No. So she died for love." "It happens," said John Fillet. "And what of you, lady?" said John Drowse. "Do you have any sisters?" No. Brothers? Mother? Father? Yes, yes, and yes. I don't see you mourning the fact you may never see them again, John Serpent said rather sharply. Be quiet, John, Mischief snapped. She may as well hear the truth, John Serpent replied. There's a very good chance she will never see her home again. Something about the expression on his face suggested to Candy that he was taking pleasure in attempting to scare her. We're going to the Abarat, girl, Serpent went on. It's a very unpredictable place. So's the hereafter, Candy said, not about to be intimidated by Serpent. Nothing to compare, Serpent said. A few tornadoes, a few poxes, inconsequential stuff. The Abarat has terrors that will turn your hair white. That's even assuming we reach the islands. What do you mean? I mean that Mama Isabella contains a wide variety of beasts that will have you as an appetizer. Enough, Serpent, Mischief said. Does he mean sharks? Miss Candy said, not wishing to exhibit too much nervousness, but already scanning the waters for a telltale dorsal fin. Sharks I'm not familiar with, Mischief replied, but the great green mantisac would certainly swallow us whole. We're not red, you see. Red? The creatures in the Isabella leave the color red alone. That's why all the ships and boats and ferries on the Sea of Isabella, every single one, are painted red. Candy was listening to this, but in truth she was only half hearing it. The flurry of events on the jetty hadn't given her time to properly think through the consequences of what she was doing. Now she had committed herself to the waters. There was no way back. Perhaps she might never see her family again. What would it be like in the house when the family realized she'd gone? They would surely assume the worst, think she'd been abducted or simply run away. It was her mother she was most concerned about, because she'd take it the hardest. Hopefully there'd be some way to get a message to her when she reached her destination. You're not regretting you came, I hope, Mischief said, his expression suggesting he was feeling a little guilty for his own part in this. No, Candy replied firmly. Absolutely not. The words had no longer escaped her lips, and a big wave lifted her up and wrenched her away from the John brothers. In just a couple of seconds, she and Mischief were carried away from one another. She heard 3 or 4 of the brothers yelling to her, but she couldn't make sense of what they were saying. She caught sight of them in the dip between the waves, but the glimpse was brief. The next moment they were gone. I'm over here! She yelled, hoping that Mischief was a stronger swimmer than she was and would be able to make his way back to her. But the words were no sooner out of her mouth than another wave of substantial size came along and carried her even farther away from the spot where they'd been parted. A little twitch of fear clutched her stomach. Don't panic, she told herself. Whatever you do, don't panic. But her own advice was hard to take. The waves were getting larger all the time, each one carrying her a little higher than the one that preceded it, and then delivering her to an even deeper trough. However much she told herself not to be afraid, there was no escaping from the facts. She was suddenly alone in an alien sea, filled with all kinds of... Her panic stopped in its tracks, shocked out by a sight of such peculiarity that all concerns were forgotten. There, squatting around a small table at the bottom of the next wave, were 4 card players. The table around which they were sitting was apparently floating freely a couple of inches above the surface of the water, and the players were squatted around it, the very picture of nonchalance. Candy had just had enough time to think, I've seen everything now. Then another wave caught her, and she was carried down a steep blue slope into the midst of the game. And so ends chapter 10. And I hope you enjoyed it. And hopefully my cold will be all the way gone by tomorrow, and I'll be able to do another Let's Read. With that being said, have a nice day, all of you.